Right, so as it is just on the nose, 7 p.m. here in London on a very beautiful sunny bank holiday evening, I'll get us started, and doubtless in the next few minutes, more people will trickle in. A very, very warm welcome to everybody to today's talk. I'm Shirley Gilbert. I'm Professor of Modern Jewish History at University College London, and I'm also the director of the Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Centre, which, as some of you may know, was established in memory of the late British historian. And I should say, this is something really I should have included in my introductions for many months now and always forget, and then I get questioned. I am no relation of Sir Martin. That is a complete coincidence. So this way we avoid those questions after. So in addition to being, of course, Sir Winston Churchill's biographer, Martin Gilbert published many dozens of books on a very wide range of mostly 20th century topics, including widely read accounts of the First and Second World Wars, of the Holocaust, the history of Israel, and the history of the modern Jewish experience. Why is the centre named after him? Well, really, the centre's aim is to bring the finest historical research to a broad non-academic public, to make history accessible and exciting. And of course, this is something that Sir Martin really excelled at. We offer a very wide program of events across the year on all of the subjects that Sir Martin spent his life exploring. So please do check out our events if you haven't already. And as a charity, we really rely on your donations so that we can keep all of our events free at the point of access and reach that very wide audience. So any contributions that you would like to make are always very gratefully received, and it's very easy to donate on our website. So having given you a very brief background to the centre, I'm really delighted today to be able to welcome Geneviève Zubrzycki, who is Professor of Sociology at the University of Michigan, and where she also holds additional roles. She's Faculty Associate at the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies. She also directs the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia and the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies. And Geneviève was also just telling me as we were setting up about the extraordinary work that she has been doing to create opportunities for 7 Ukrainian scholars to come to the University of Michigan to study, which really is an amazing piece of work to have done. So perhaps someone will want to ask Geneviève about that afterwards. She's a historical and cultural sociologist, and in her research over the past 2 decades, she's focused mainly on nationalism and religion. She looks at the place of religious symbols in the public sphere. Her books include the award-winning book titled The Crosses of Auschwitz, Nationalism and Religion in Post-Communist Poland. And a couple of years ago, she was a recipient of a prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship. There is much more to say about Genevieve's amazing work and achievements, but I will pivot directly to her newest book, which she's going to be talking to us about today. And in this book, she's interested in the a renewal of Jewish life in Poland since the fall of communism, and in the question of why non-Jewish Poles are so fascinated with Jewish culture, which is a complicated and really rich topic. So Geneviève will speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, and after that, we will open up the floor for your questions and comments. Do feel free to post your questions in the chat, either to everybody or just to me, and we will put them to Geneviève afterwards. So her talk is titled Resurrecting the Jew.
Yeah.
Philosemitism.
אני אדבר איתך מחר, טוב? Bye.
Right. Geneviève, over to you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Shirley, for inviting me to give this lecture, and thank you everyone for being here today. It's a great honor to be here, and I look forward to your questions and our discussion after the more formal lecture. Although I meant this to be more, I'm going to do my best, especially on Zoom, to have this to be very dynamic. And I will not read. I will actually talk you through some of the issues I'm analyzing in my new book. And we might want to talk about first the title, Resurrecting the Jew, which is surprising, perhaps controversial. What I wanted with this title is to really underline that a large part of what we call the Jewish revival is actually enacted by non-Jews and for non-Jews. So a key question in my book is what is the meaning of the resurrection of Jewish culture by non-Jews in Poland, what it means to them, and what's in it for the Jews, and what are the tensions or the problems from this sort of activity of cultural resurrection of Jewish culture by non-Jews. The book is also about the renewal of Jewish life in Poland, which has been very significant since the late 1980s, and especially so, I would say, in the last 15 to 20 years, partly because of the interests of non-Jews in Jewish culture history, and a new examination on the Holocaust and very self-critical examination of Polish participation in the Holocaust. And so the book investigates both the renewal of Jewish communal life after 1989, as well as non-Jewish Poles' attempt at recreating or resurrecting Jewish culture. It's a twin phenomenon that sometimes is really parallel, sometimes it intersects, sometimes it conflicts. So that's what the book analyzes. And it also, the book discusses the current government led by the right-wing Law and Justice Party, their attempt to silence research on the Holocaust through the so-called Holocaust speech law. And if you have read, if some of you are following Polish news, you may have read that last week, on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the onset of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, historian and sociologist Barbara Engelking, in an interview on a private television station, very popular, but not governmental, not public television, mentioned that Poles actually, in a way, betrayed their Jewish brothers by primarily remaining passive during World War II and not coming to the rescue of Jews to the extent that they could. And that created, actually immediately created a reaction in the Polish public sphere. The Prime Minister of Poland said that actually she should not say anything about these things, said that he might launch an investigation under these claims. And so there's this kind of now legal harassment that she's facing again. A few years ago, a book that she and Jan Grabowski wrote, they were also the victims of legal harassment until the Supreme Court overturned in appeal a sentence. So the question of what the role of Polish participation in the Holocaust is a very hot topic. It's an ongoing topic that's currently brought in the public sphere. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to different websites. I'm happy to provide that information, but there's several petitions and letters of protest against this legal harassment in support of Professor Engelking that are ongoing. So in my book, I'm also addressing this, and I'm addressing how actually some position of the current government is related actually to this critical soul searching about Polish participation in the Holocaust, and is also a reaction against the desire from different parts of different corners of Polish society to investigate the Polish Jewish past, to be critical about this, and to bring Jewish culture and Jewish history into the fore of Polish social debates now. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today in this lecture. I will soon share my screen if you want to be just a minute. Play. So that's the book cover of my most recent book, published in September, Resurrecting the Jew, Nationalism, Philosemitism, and Poland's Jewish Revival. And it shows a very beautiful mural by an Israeli street art collective, Broken Fingers, who took the one side of a tenement house in Kazimierz, the Jewish district of Krakow, and painted it in memory of Linien, who was an artist, formed at the Beaux-Arts in Krakow, became an early Zionist. And so it's celebrating the Polish-Jewish connection in the arts, but also really underlining the contribution of Polish Jews also to Israeli culture and the Zionist project. But before we go into the revival, I want to go back to giving you some historical cues that are important to understand the revival. So Poland was, until the Shoah, was a very Jewish country. Actually, 10% of the Polish population was Jewish. So it was the largest Jewish community in the world was in Poland. So 3.5 million Jews lived in Poland. And what you need to think about is what that meant. It meant that a third of Warsaw, for example, was Jewish, a fourth of Krakow, right? So this is more than New York today, right? 1/3 of Warsaw being Jewish. This is a very large population that made its mark on the city. A quarter of Krakow, and Jews were also dispersed throughout the country. So in cities, small towns, and of course in Stadtlach. So the population also at 1939 on the eve of World War II was very diverse. So you had very religious, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, or the Hasidim on the one hand, many things in the middle, and you had secular assimilated Jews on the other. So different forms of Judaism were practiced in Poland, different levels of interaction with Polish society, different languages. Some were Polish speaking, some were German speaking, many were Yiddish speaking. So a very diverse population. But when you think of the importance of the Jewish community in Poland, then you have to think also of the fact that Jews constituted the middle class. So we might have the idea of Polish Jews being primarily from smaller Stadtlach, the Orthodox, that were lesser educated, poorer, primarily in the southeast in Galicia, but actually, when you look at statistics, about 60% of lawyers in Poland prior to World War II were Jewish. 40% of doctors were Jewish. So you could see that the Jewish population occupied very key positions in middle class, creating an urban middle class of occupying liberal professions and small businesses. Now, this is showing a map of Poland prior to, well, actually at 1939, you'll see. So the borders of Poland shifted dramatically as a result of the war settlements. But when I want to show you,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't see the next slide. I'm not sure if others do.
Do you? You don't see a map?
Nope. Just the front cover.
Oh, that's interesting. Now
there we go.
See
yep,
this?
Now we see the map.
Okay, but if I do play, you don't see it? You don't see that now?
Yep, see it now. Yep.
Okay, so I don't know. Please let me know if that happens again.
Great.
Sorry about that. Okay, so with the Shoah, this changed dramatically. So there's 6 million European Jews who are murdered in the Holocaust. Over half of these victims are Polish, or at least from the former Polish lands. That includes, on this map, you can see a territory that was lost to the Soviet Union in 1945. The areas in red that you see is territory that was not Polish until then, that were part of Germany or the Free City of Gdańsk, that became incorporated into post-war Poland. But 3.1 million Polish Jews were murdered, which represented 90% of the Polish Jewish community. So enormous loss of Polish Jewish life, destruction of a lot of small towns, Städtlach, that might have been 80 or 90% Jewish prior to World War II, and that became basically 100% Polish after. The territories were lost in the east. You have massive population transfers as well. So that means that people who were Poles who were and Jews who were in Galicia, in the former lands of Poland, were relocated into the new borders of Poland, often actually occupying towns from Western Poland that were now integrated into the new Polish territory. But there's also large numbers of survivors who decides to remain primarily in what is now Ukraine, Belarus, and urban areas of Lithuania. In 1946 and the year following, there's also pogroms in Kielce, in Kraków. There's a lot of intimidation of survivors who are coming back to Poland, coming back either if they were hiding in with Gentile populations under different papers, they might come back to their homes, to their towns, survivors from the camps who returned to their homes, or survivors who survived in the Soviet Union who returned to Poland, often to face harassment and violence, or to find that their properties actually were taken by neighbors. And so many decide to move elsewhere, either to move westward, immigrate to Western countries, Canada, the US, Australia. The largest community of survivors was established in Australia after the war, which means that after the war, there's very, very few Jews remaining in Poland. And the entire demographic landscape of Poland changed as a result of the Shoah, the border transfers, the shift of borders westward, and the fact that several survivors do not return to Poland. So if you look at these slides, you see that in 1931, in the census, ethnic Poles constituted about 65% of the population. By 1946, they constitute 96%. Jews constitute, yes, same
Sorry
thing
again to interrupt you. We don't see that slide.
Okay, so I'm going to stop doing, I'm just going to do this way.
Perfect.
Because I don't know why that's the first time that this is happening. So is that big enough for you?
I think it's fine. And at least this way we can see when we definitely need to see a new slide. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I apologize for that. So as I said, Jews constituted 10%. And then you had 25% of the population that was constituted by different ethnic minorities: Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Belarusians, Germans, Tatars, and others. And Catholics, likewise, represented 65% of the population. So the majority, but still it was a pluralistic society. By 1946, basically, Poland is constituted overwhelmingly by ethnic Poles and by Catholics. And this is important because basically there's few other people to tell their stories of the war. And the socialist regime also has a very specific narrative of World War II that's focused around, that's really ideologically motivated, in which basically fascists came to Poland, killed a bunch of people, and then the Soviets came and rescued different nations. and establish free democratic societies in which ethnicity and religion does not really matter. That means that the stories and the history of World War II is told really according to a Polish and a socialist narrative in which the specific fate of the Jewish population is basically silenced. And this has very important effect on the collective memory of World War II. If there are very few Jews to tell their story of World War II and what they experienced, it's not something that is being talked about much at all in Poland until 1989 and the fall of communism. So between 1945 and 1989, the Jewish communities in Poland are very small. They do have institutions, but they tend to be very isolated. The Holocaust is folded into a broader narrative of Polish suffering. And also in 1968 and 1969, for political reasons, there's an anti-Jewish campaign, and some 20,000 Polish Jews are expelled or strongly invited to leave, basically. So there's some 20,000 who leave. And the others actually really go underground, often not even telling their children that they have Jewish roots or that they are Jewish. So the Jewish past of Poland recedes even further in the background. Now, in 1980s, with the emergence of the Solidarity movement, there's a strong democratic movement that emerges. And as part of that effort to democratize Polish society, Solidarity organizes several flying universities, underground universities, where you have people who meet and discuss taboo topics in Polish history. And one of these taboo topics is that of Poland's Jewish past and that of the Jewish fate during the Second World War. And you have the beginnings of a revival with the children of survivors who start scratching and strives to uncover different truths about the Jewish experience during World War II. Some of them who really reconnect with Judaism and are starting a small Jewish revival. That's, for example, for those of you who know Poland, that's Gilbert is one of these important Jewish activists. Stanisław Krajewski is another one. Adam Michnik, who was a secular Jew, is also part of that movement of talking about a Jewish experience that's separate from that of Polish Catholics during World War II, and wants to see the opening of important historical investigation and discourse about the Shoah. The late 1980s is also when the film Shoah is shown on Polish television by Claude Lanzmann. And there's a very important poem that's published in a Catholic newspaper. Poor Poles look at the ghetto, and that starts a discussion. But this is still restricted to really a very small group of elites, intellectual elites, people involved in the Solidarity movement and in progressive Catholic circles. So although it's the seeds of a Jewish revival of communal life with a new generation, it's nothing compared to what we're seeing now, but it does have some roots in there. So in 1989, is the beginning of a more mainstream or a more impactful renewal, thanks primarily to the influx of human and financial resources from the West, from the US, from Israel, from Canada, from the UK as well. So different foundations who come to Poland and want to really provide institutional resources for Jewish communities and Jewish individuals to start living a Jewish life. So it's the creation of schools, daycare, the provision, for example, of kosher cafeterias. It is also, these foundations are sending personnel to Poland. They're sending rabbis because there were very few rabbis in Poland. They also have money to renovate synagogues, for example. So that's a very important communal revival that allows, I'm changing this, that allows the creation of different institutions. And institutions are very important in that renewal. It really injects a new life into older institutions and new ones. So publications like Midrash, theater productions that are more and more often in Yiddish, the creation of Limud, for example, that comes later, but where 3-day seminars when Polish Jews are teaching other Polish Jews about different things related to Polish Jewish life. The Lauder Morash schools, the Jewish Historical Institute is also getting renewed interest and more funds to do more. In 2008, Prince Charles actually goes to, in the earlier 2000, goes to Poland, Krakow, and see what can I do, and he actually helps found the JCC in Krakow in 2008. And so there's really new resources, both religious and secular, that is helping a new generation of Jews, the second and the third post-Holocaust generation, rekindle or reappropriate different facets of Judaism and Jewishness. That is very important. And so today you might ask me how many Jews in Poland. So very, very few. So it's between, there's a mistake there. It's between 4,500 and 13,000, depending on how you count, you determine Jewishness, whether it's according to Jewish law, or whether it's self-definition, self-identification in the census, or if you define the core population as to who qualifies for the law of return. So who could actually make Aliyah and receive, be received in Israel. So this is a tiny population, especially if you compare to the number of Jews in Russia, Germany, or Hungary. But it is a population with enormous potential for growth, because a lot of Jews who survived by hiding their identity are now recovering their identity. So when I asked the chief rabbi of Poland, American-born Michael Shudrick, how many Jews there were, he says, well, you know, some people say between 15 and 20. He says, take that number, double it, and add one, because there's always one more Jew coming out of the closet. And that metaphor that he employs of coming out of the closet is actually very interesting, because people are coming out of the closet. They learn in different ways that they have Jewish ancestry. Sometimes it's a deathbed confession by a grandmother who will tell her daughter or son that actually she's not the birth mother, his or her birth mother, that she adopted the child, from a Jewish mother in the ghetto, for example. Or it's a granddaughter who starts reading about Jewish history, Jewish customs, and finds out that, oh, grandma was baking challah on Friday, and she was very keen on keeping meat and dairy separate in the fridge. She starts investigating and then finds out that, yes, my grandmother is Jewish. One story I heard is an elderly gentleman who had a stroke, and when he woke up in the hospital, he couldn't speak Polish, but he spoke Yiddish. Came as a shock for the grandchildren. So there's all sorts of people like this who are learning that they have Jewish ancestry. Some of them won't do much with it, but others do. Others start actually looking and are trying to find answers to their questions about who were their ancestors, what happened to them, how did they survive, how did those who did not survive actually perish during the Holocaust. They might find family members in the US, Western Europe, or Israel, might visit other branches of the family in those countries and learn about the different family stories that were hidden by the Polish side of the family that were hiding during and after the Holocaust. So some community leaders estimate that as far as many as 100,000 Poles could have Jewish roots, and that it's important to try to reach out to these people and give them different means for them to reconnect to Jewish ancestry. So, for example, the JCC in Krakow has a genealogist on site that helps people who come and who thinks that they might have Jewish ancestry, helps them recover, you know, through different ways of doing archival research or, you know, connecting with different members of families to establish their Jewish roots. The JCC in Krakow that was established in 2008 organizes all sorts of cycle of rituals that makes it possible for, and we call them, and they call themselves new Jews, so people who are recovering or in the process of recovering a Jewish identity, to celebrate different holidays that they have never celebrated in their lives. So here is a Seder, I think it's 2012 or 2013, and they don't celebrate in their families because their families did not celebrate them. So they are recovering those traditions by celebrating in communal spaces like the JCC. I took part in 2017 to a birthright trip to Israel. So I joined the trip of young Poles who qualified for the trip. So it means that they had at least one Jewish grandparent. And we spent 12 days in Israel for most of them, except for two who had Israeli parents, one Israeli parents. The others had never been to Israel. And I discovered myself Israel through their eyes. And this photo is very touching. It's at Yad Vashem. And we were looking for a tree that had been planted in honor of the woman you see in the center in the red blouse. So she had one Jewish grandmother and one Gentile grandmother who had actually saved Jews during World War II and who had a tree planted in her honor since she was a righteous among nations. And so for her going to Israel, it was really reconnecting two parts of her family. And it was a very moving moment for all members there. I should say also that one of the IDF soldiers that joined us during that trip was the grandson of Amos Oz. So he brought, toward the end of the trip, like signed copies of his grandfather's novels. It's the one on the left, sitting, kneeling. He's likely to become a political leader at one point, an extremely smart, charismatic, friendly young man. So you see also these young people rediscovering different connections to Jewishness in Israel, a very impactful trip for them, but also impactful in different ways, realizing actually that although they have Jewish roots, they are still very Polish. Being in Israel made them realize that they were first and foremost Polish, but that they wanted to connect with their Jewishness. And so when I interviewed them when we returned, it was really interesting to see the impact of the trip on their newly forged Polish Jewish identities. So this is part of the book that I'm analyzing, the renewal of Jewish communal life in Poland. Another aspect of the book is focusing specifically on non-Jews who are doing Jewish things and what that means for them, why they're doing that. And so I want to go back in the historical narrative a little bit to give you context to what is going on now. So in the 1990s, with the opening our archives, with the lifting of different taboos, you have a new narrative of the Second World War that becomes established, in which it is clearly stated that the largest group of victims during World War II were the Jews. You have also the opening of borders and easier travel to the former Soviet bloc means that there is Holocaust tourism increasingly. And all of this puts Poles into contact with a very different narratives of World War II. And this leads to different tensions between Poles and Jews, both at home and outside of Poland. So I don't know if you remember in 1989, the controversy over Carmelite nuns that were just outside the former concentration camp, or in 1997, 1998, ultra-nationalist Poles who were erected over 300 crosses just outside the former camp to really keep the memory of Auschwitz in its communist version, as if Auschwitz really belonged to Poles and not to Jews. So what you see in the 1990s emerging, and especially in the 2000s, is that Poland's Jewish past becomes a key element to discuss different things, discuss how Catholic is the Polish nation, what is the role of Poles in World War II, what definition of the nation should be now? Should the Catholic Church have as much power as it does in contemporary Poland in a non-communist, in a free and democratic society? Jewish history, Polish-Jewish relations become one of the battlegrounds for discussing Polish collective memory and identity. And this is especially so after 2000 and 2001, when Jan Gross publishes first in Polish in 2000, his book Neighbors, that tells the story of the pogrom in Jedwabne, where ethnic Poles tormented, tortured, and murdered their Jewish neighbors. And it created a very important public debate about the Holocaust in Poland and participation of Poles in the Holocaust. It was followed by lots of literature actually digging in on the Polish participation in the Holocaust, and in pogroms. So Jan Gross follows up in 2006 with his book Fear, and about retribution against Jews who return home after the war, Golden Harvest or Night Without End, The Fate of Jews in German-occupied Poland by Jan Grabowski and Barbara Engelking. That's the book actually that created a lawsuit against the authors, Grabowski and Engelking, but they were exonerated in the end. In 2004, Poland joins the EU. And this is also a very important moment because there's an influx of resources and programs for Poles to examine different ethnic minorities, and Jews become the minority that Poles will be the most interested in teaching about and learning about. And that's the moment where you see, after 2004, a flourishing of cultural activity around Jewish culture. So Jewish festivals of culture in the four corners of Poland, starting in 1988, but really booming after, it's really mid 2000s. So I want to show you, so these are festivals in Łódź, Kraków, Warsaw, Lublin, different places. And there are currently over 40 festivals of Jewish culture in Poland. I want to show you a map that I created, a series of maps. So the first one in 1988 in Kraków, then a few other ones in Tarnów, Wrocław. But what really changes is the 2000, as you can see, where you have a wide spread of festivals of various size. So the red dots are the festivals that were continuing over previous years. And if you look at the 2000, and I'll show you a bigger map, is a current map, basically, of Jewish festivals in Poland. So my key point in doing this was to show the that the Jewish revival and the interest of non-Jews and in Polish, in Jewish life and Jewish culture is not just a metropolitan, it's not just a hipster, cosmopolitan, elite interest. There's interest all over Poland. Some of them are very small festivals. Some others, like the festival in Krakow, is 7 to 8 days. It's also not limited to Warsaw, Krakow, and Wrocław. As you can see, you have Jewish festivals in different smaller towns, often in former Städtlach. These are posters from the Krakow Festival of Jewish Culture. And that festival actually has been taken by the Ministry of Culture as a calling card for Poland. So that very often when Poland is to be talking about Polish culture, they present some of their activities around the Poland's Jewish past as a key feature of Polish culture today. I will skip this. This is about methods and data, but basically I conducted research for this project for over 10 years in various Polish cities and towns, and that trip to Israel. But I want to focus on the role of those festivals. So sometimes we might want to think of those as really, oh, this is like a Disneyland or is really kitsch, but actually a lot of those festivals have an educational component. People learning Yiddish, they won't learn much in 10 days, but actually why do they bother going at 8 a.m. 7 days in a row to learn a few words of Yiddish or learn the alphabet? It's because very often they find letters in their grandparents' things, and they want to know what those letters are saying, and they start suspecting that they have Jewish roots. So festivals become important sites for people with Jewish ancestry to reappropriate some parts of Jewish culture. Public lectures are important also in those festivals. But the key thing that I want to talk about here is the fact when, at the beginning I mentioned that there was a lot of intersection between the Jewish renewal of Jewish communal life and non-Jews' interest in Jewish culture. Here you have a couple who were married before, who found out that they had Jewish roots and remarried as Jews, but during the Jewish festival, because they knew there would be enough people to celebrate their new life together, their renewed commitment as a Jewish couple. So the Jewish festival in Krakow, for example, becomes a very important moment in which Jews from all over Poland and also from the Polish Jewish diaspora come to Krakow to meet again and spend time together. Different initiatives, 7 synagogues in Krakow. So there's, based on the Museum at Night event, tens of thousands of Krakowians visit the different synagogues in the Jewish district. It was created, I think, in 2008 or 9, and now it has become a yearly event. And you also have more than half a dozen new museums that were created. So in Krakow here you see 2. Schindler's Factory Museum also is an important museum. The Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw, extremely important museum. And I want to show you this picture here of the number of people lining up to enter the museum, even before there was a core exhibit open. So they just wanted to see what was going on with the museum before the official opening. So you have museums that organize exhibits and public programming. You also have the Holocaust and Jewish Studies program at Polish universities, dozens of them. And look at that statistics. Between 2011 and 2021, approximately 100 books and 100 articles were published on average per year, many of them written to be accessible to a broader public. So This is why also there's Judaica bookstores opening, and bookstores, almost all serious bookstores now have Judaica sections in them. So it's not just festivals and klezmer clubs, it's also very serious engagement with Jewish history, Polish Jewish history. Commemorative practices, this is on the occasion of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And I need to conclude, so I will go fast on this. But also I wanted to mention, and I did a lot of research and interviews with non-Jews participating in Jewish communal life by volunteering. They volunteer by cleaning, hosting events, work, office work, reception work. And these people are very important because they become ambassadors of Jewish life in their own families and their own, their roommates, their university programs, translating what is going on in Jewish life in various Jewish organizations. So to conclude, my research in the book is showing that contemporary Jewish-centered memory work and all these cultural initiatives in Poland are part of a broader project to build pluralism. This is not to say, of course, that this is just what it's about. I'm not claiming that people involved in that societal projects are not genuinely interested in Jewish culture, in Judaism, or that they're not truly caring about the memory of those murdered in the Holocaust. I'm not saying also that those who seek and hope to discover Jewish roots, and I met people who hoped to find Jewish roots and found German roots instead, and those who convert to Judaism just do it because it's fashionable or interesting. That is not what I found. But what I did find is that a lot of the people invested, the non-Jewish Poles invested in the revival of Jewish culture in Poland, are apolitical. They're often cynical about political processes, and some of them don't vote, but they try to build a democracy, a pluralistic society, by embracing a diversity of cultures. And we might want to discuss why Jews instead of Ukrainians, for example, but or the Vietnamese, which is the largest visible minority in Warsaw. But for them, volunteering at Jewish organizations, cleaning up and restoring abandoned Jewish cemeteries, or learning Yiddish, taking Jewish dancing classes, is a way to articulate a vision of Poland that is utterly different than the mono-ethnic and the mono-religious, the Catholic vision of national identity and of the polity that the current government is proposing. I will end here so that we have some time for questions.
Thank you so much, Geneviève, for really informative, but also such a rich talk that raised so many different questions on lots of different fronts. It's a really complex and multi-layered topic. So, and you touched on so many different things. There are already lots of questions flying in. So I will jump in and start to pose some of them. And apologies in advance that we may not get to all of them since we have about 10 minutes left. The first thing I did want to note is that there were a couple of people who noted additional festivals that you may want to add to your map. I've noted down all of the details and I'm glad to send them to you.
Thank you.
But perhaps if others have more information and would like to convey that to Geneviève, please do drop us an email at the Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Centre. We'd be happy to pass it on. So one question was asking about the anti-Jewish campaign during 1968-9 and asked where those 20,000 Jews went at that time.
They went all over the US, Canada, but a lot to Scandinavian countries. So Denmark, Sweden, Norway, some to Germany, France, I assume to the UK, but I haven't met personally some that went to the UK, but they went all over. Israel, of course, as well.
Right. We then have a question that is asking about present-day Jewish life in Poland. which you described, in asking what is the attitude or the relationship of the government and Polish Catholic citizens to that renewal of Jewish communities and Jewish life.
So what is the relationship between the religious communities and the current government?
Or what is the attitude of, my understanding of the question is, what is the attitude of the government and of other citizens to the fact that Jews are starting to practice, that they're starting to hold Pesach Seders, and that there are tiny little communities starting to form?
It's difficult to comment on how Polish population as a whole. I can tell you what my Jewish friends and communal leaders tell me. They tell me that they feel safer in Poland than they feel in Western Europe, living as Jews and wearing kippas. They tell me this all the time. They tell me that they tell me it's easier now to live as observant Jews than it was, of course, 20 years ago, because there's kosher options and there's different ways. They find people generally receptive. So for them, having all of these cultural institutions celebrating Jewish life, they see this as a positive development because it provides a context in which they can exist and practice safely. The government, the chief rabbi of Poland lights the Hanukkah every year at the Belvedere Presidential Palace. The government is supportive. They can't afford not to. Although they're not doing this for votes because they're unlikely to get, Jewish individuals voting for this right-wing government. But they're keen on supporting all sorts of Jewish initiatives in order to be in good terms with the US and Israel. But basically, and that's something very important, that the people who are most at risk these days of any kind of violence on the street or anti-anything are actually LGBTQ communities. And this is why a lot of social scientists are saying that, for example, gays are the new Jews, right? So they're the ones who suffer from most discrimination. And this is not to say that there's no anti-Semitism in Poland. There is. There is no question that there is. You can see anti-Semitic graffiti all the time, and you can see anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish now harassment against Professor Engelking. There's no question about that. But there is very little fear of violence. And what I'm told also by Jewish colleagues in Poland is, that anti-Semitism is more worrisome in the US today than it is in Poland.
It's really fascinating. I'm going to abuse my position as chair just to ask a question which occurs to me as you're giving this answer. And I'm thinking of your closing when you were talking about the kind of Jewish revival as being part of a project to build pluralism or to articulate a vision of a different kind of Polish identity. And I wonder to what extent that is relating to the treatment of LGBTQ. Is there an element of using that narrative of reviving Jewish life to present a vision of Poland that then allows for the treatment of other minorities in these ways? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So yes. This is also a government appropriated narrative.
Well, and I mean, the thing is that the government, so one of the arguments I make in the book that I'm showing, like in the very first pages of the introduction, the Jewish revival is not a reaction to what the government is doing. It's the government now. It's a right-wing backlash against, since 1989, the steady secularization of Polish national identity. That is, the number of Poles who do not think that Polishness should be equated with Catholicism, and that the Catholic Church should not have a say in politics and in many, in the legal sphere. And all of that examination that happens in the late 1990s and early 2000 with Jan Gross's book on the role of Polish participation in the Holocaust, this is what the government is reacting against. So it's the contrary, right? They are reacting to a movement wanting to really open things up. And so, now basically what you have is the Jewish revival continuing. It might come, and that's what I think might be interesting to see in the future years, whether Ukrainians, because of their fight for democracy now in Ukraine, whether the Ukrainian trope becomes more important in the Polish narrative. If building multiculturalism is also kind of celebrating Ukrainianness. Until now, it hasn't been so, because in Polish imagination, Ukrainianness is primarily associated with rural life, peasants, so because of the history of Galicia, Poles were nobles or lived in cities, and Ukrainians were part of the peasantry. This is still the association that Poles have. Also with Ukrainian domestic workers coming to Poland, and construction workers. Now, with what Ukrainians are doing now and really fighting for democracy, for their freedom, etc., it might be possible to kind of want to embrace Ukrainianness as also part of the Polish past.
So interesting. Okay, so another question. Does Jewish tourism and its economic benefits have anything to do with the Jewish revival?
It does. It does, like Holocaust tourism. So there's Holocaust tourism from people from all over the world, but a lot of people are coming to see the former camps, but also where they were from. They often come for the Jewish festival in Krakow, which is important because it kind of brings them closer also to Polish Jewish culture. They reappropriate that part of their ancestry. They've been divorced from Poland, separated from Poland for a long time. Sometimes it reconciliates them also with Poland. And so, yes, and actually a lot of the businesses like hotels on some of the main streets in Kazimierz are Jewish owned by American and Israeli Jews.
Someone asks, has the Polin Museum had any impact on non-Jews and how they feel about the Jewish people in general and Jews in Poland?
It's difficult to say, broadly, but yes, I have a chapter in my book that's about that museum. And what I did, I observed with research assistant over 100 groups of Poles visiting, so 100 tours. And it's really interesting how they see and they assimilate that exhibit. It's been a very important institution. There's also some, people could fall into a complacent reading of the museum. See, we were so great. We hosted Jews like for 1,000 years. Then the German came and the Holocaust, and then we were rescuing them during the Holocaust. There is that danger, and some people, fall into that. But a lot of people are actually visiting that exhibit and saying, oh, I had no idea of this. I had no idea of how rich that history was. And it's important for us to recover this for the memory of the victims, but also for ourselves.
I'll pose one more question, and I really must apologize for all the other fascinating questions we've received, and which I will pass on to Geneviève that we just didn't have time to pose. But the final question I will pose is a question about how the Roman Catholic Church responds to these Jewish-related activities and whether it encourages or discourages participation in them by non-Jews.
So some of those are organized by the Catholic Church. So there's like days of Christian Jewish encounters, for example. So some of them they participate in the most important festivals. There's always someone from the Catholic Church, not the hierarchy, but priests, for example, who are involved, who might have participated in a book reading, a panel, etc. But they tend to be from a specific orientation within the church that is referred to as open Catholicism. And they tend to be Franciscan or Dominican, or associated with Tygodnik Powszechny, which is based in Krakow, related to very strong emphasis on ecumenism and John Paul II's rapprochement with Judaism. but not the church as a whole, not the hierarchy of the church that tends to be very traditional and supportive of the current government. I'm responding very quickly because I know we're.
Yeah, well, hopefully everything that you've given us today will have whet everybody's appetite, and encourage them to go and buy your book. And I've popped into the chat again there the code that you can use to get a 30% discount on Genevieve's book. Thank you so much again on behalf of the Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Center for such a rich, fascinating, but also accessible talk. So many different things there to explore. It's really just wonderful. And your research, obviously, 10 years worth of it is so deep and fascinating. So I would warmly encourage everybody to go and get a hold of Genevieve's book and also her previous books, which are fascinating too. Thank you again. And a reminder about our next event. Next Wednesday, we have Adam Mendelsohn of the University of Cape Town, who will be talking about what it was like to be a Jewish soldier in the American Civil War, which should be really excellent. So please do register to book your place. Hopefully we'll see lots of you there too. Thank you so much again, Geneviève, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for
us.
the invitation, and thank you for spending your evening with me.
See you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.